I knew exactly what my son-in-law was going to say before he opened his mouth. I'd been watching him build up to it for 3 weeks. He had a particular way of clearing his throat when he was about to deliver news he'd already decided wasn't negotiable. A small sound, barely audible, like a man preparing a speech he'd rehearsed alone in his car. My daughter did the same thing when she was 12 and wanted to tell me she'd broken something. The apple didn't fall far, I suppose. It just rolled across the yard and married someone exactly like itself. My name isn't important right now. What's important is that I spent 41 years building something, and on a Tuesday evening in October, my son-in-law sat across from me at my own kitchen table, in the house I'd owned since before he was born, and told me he wanted me out. He didn't say it that plainly, of course. Men like him never do. He said, "We've been thinking, and we really feel like it might be time to talk about your living situation." My daughter, I'll call her by what she's called me her whole life, because that's what matters. She sat beside him and didn't look at me. She looked at the table, at her hands. At the mug of coffee she'd stopped drinking 20 minutes earlier, I said, "My living situation." He nodded, slowly, the way people nod when they've decided patience is a performance. "You're 63, he said. "The house is big, the maintenance alone." "I do my own maintenance," I said. "Dad." That was my daughter. One word. Soft. Like she was asking me not to make this harder than it needed to be. I looked at her. I thought about the night she was born, the way I held her in the hospital and thought, this is the thing I will protect more than anything else in my life. I thought about driving her to her first day of kindergarten, about teaching her to ride a bike in this driveway, about the prom dress fittings and the college visits and the day she called me crying from an apartment in Columbus because she didn't know how to be a grown-up yet, and I drove 4 hours to sit with her. I thought about all of that and said very calmly, "Go ahead." My son-in-law's name is Donovan. He works in commercial real estate. He is 41 years old, has very good teeth, and has never in the 11 years I've known him asked me a single question about my life before he entered it. He unfolded a piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Neat creases. He'd folded it carefully. That told me everything. "We've actually spoken with a senior living consultant," he said. "There are some really wonderful communities in the area. Active lifestyle, social programs. You'd like me to sell my house," I said. He smiled. The smile of a man who has already won and is being gracious about it. "We think it makes financial sense," he said. "The market is strong right now. You could net somewhere around 450, maybe 470. That would set you up very comfortably in one of these places, and honestly," he paused. That pause. "It frees up some things for us as well." There it was, frees up some things. I picked up my coffee. I took a sip. I set it down. It said, "That's interesting." He seemed pleased. My daughter still hadn't looked at me. "We've done a lot of research," he said. "Sunridge Estates, for example, has a waiting list, but we have a contact." "Sunridge," I said. "That's out on Route North." "Yeah. Beautiful facility. Golf, swimming, they do wine tastings on Fridays." "Wine tastings," I said. "Exactly." He leaned forward slightly, warming up now. "You'd probably enjoy it. You'd be around people your own age, people with similar—" "Donovan," I said. He stopped. "I appreciate the research." I folded my hands on the table. "Let me think about it." He blinked. He'd expected resistance or capitulation. Not that. "Of course," he said. "Take your time." I nodded. I smiled. I said goodnight. I went upstairs to my office, sat down at my desk, and called my attorney. His name is Bert. We've known each other since 1987. He was a groomsman at my wedding, back when my wife was still alive, back when this house still had the sound of a family in it. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was still at his desk at 9:30 on a Tuesday, which is a thing I've always liked about Bert. "They went ahead and did it," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "When?" he asked. "About an hour ago." Donovan had a paper. Of course he had a paper. I leaned back in my chair. Through the window I could see the maple tree my wife planted in 1994. It was past peak now, the leaves going brown at the edges, but in 2 weeks it would still be the best thing in the yard. He mentioned the house value, I said. 450, 470, optimistically. Bert made a sound that might have been a laugh. "He doesn't know," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Nobody knows," I said. "That's the point." Let me back up. Let me tell you who I am, because it matters. I grew up in Akron, Ohio. My father worked at a tire plant for 32 years. My mother cleaned houses on weekends to help pay for my sister's braces. We weren't poor, exactly, but we were careful. We counted things, we reused things. We never talked about money in terms of what it could buy us. We talked about it in terms of what it could protect us from. I went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and worked nights at a printing company to cover the rest. I graduated with a degree in civil engineering and $4,200 in debt, which I paid off in 14 months. I moved to the Columbus area, got a job with a mid-size infrastructure firm, and spent the next 12 years doing work that most people don't think about until something breaks. Bridges, water systems, storm drainage, the invisible architecture of a city. When I was 34, 3 colleagues and I left the firm and started our own. We had 9 employees and 1 contract. 7 years later, we had 220 employees and offices in 4 states. We sold the company in 2009 for $22 million. I took my share. I paid taxes on it properly and completely, because my father always said the kind of man you are in private is the only kind of man you really are. I invested most of it quietly, with a financial advisor who had been managing my portfolio since I was 38, and who had, over those years, done exceptionally well. I kept the rest in 2 trusts, one for my daughter, one for any grandchildren she might eventually have. I did not buy a bigger house. I did not buy a boat. I drove a 12-year-old Ford F-150 that I maintained myself because I'd rather spend an afternoon in my garage than spend money proving something to people who don't matter. Donovan did not know any of this. My daughter knew some of it. Enough to understand we weren't struggling. Not enough to know the full picture, because I'd always believed that money tells you things about people before they're ready to tell you themselves, and I had learned over many years that the best way to understand someone's character is to let them believe the stakes are lower than they are. This was not manipulation. This was patience. There's a difference, though it requires honesty to see it. When my daughter married Donovan, I gave them a wedding that cost $40,000 and asked for nothing in return except that they be happy. They were happy for a while. I think they still were, in the way that's more habit than feeling. Donovan had done well in commercial real estate. Not exceptional, but comfortable. He liked to talk about deals in ways that made them sound larger than they were. He liked to be the most successful person in any room he entered. He had entered my house for 11 years and always believed he was. Over the following 2 weeks, I made some calls. Bert helped me with the legal side. My financial advisor helped me with the rest. What I did was entirely legal, entirely transparent, and entirely appropriate given the circumstances. I want to be clear about that, because some people will read this and assume I was playing games. I wasn't. I was simply making certain that before any conversation about my house or my finances or my future happened, the full picture was available. The full picture, it turned out, was considerably more detailed than anyone had expected. My investment portfolio, by October of that year, had grown to a value that I won't state precisely here, but which my accountant and I had reviewed 6 months earlier during my annual financial review, and which was substantially larger than the $470,000 Donovan had estimated I might net from selling my house. Substantially. More than that. I had never sold this house, and I was not going to. But there was something else. Something that had been sitting quietly in a file for almost 3 years. Something I had never mentioned to Donovan, because he had never asked, and something I had not mentioned to my daughter because the timing had never felt right. My company, the one we sold in 2009, we had sold to a larger infrastructure group out of Cleveland. That group had been acquired in 2014. The acquiring company had gone public in 2019. As part of the original sale agreement, I had retained a small equity stake, 2%, that had converted upon the IPO into shares. I had not sold those shares. Over the following 4 years, those shares had done something shares occasionally do when you buy them in the right company and leave them alone. Bert knew. My financial advisor knew. The IRS knew, because I'd filed everything correctly every single year. My daughter did not know. Donovan certainly did not know. My accountant, a careful woman named Harriet, who had been doing my taxes since 2003, and who has the energy of someone half her age and the skepticism of someone twice it, had sat me down that past spring and walked me through the current numbers. I remember her looking at me over her reading glasses and saying, "You understand what you're sitting on." "I do," I said. "Most people in your position would have made this more complicated by now." "I know." She looked at me for a long moment. "Don't let anyone talk you into something foolish," she said. It was the most personal thing she had ever said to me. Coming from Harriet, it was practically a hug. "I don't intend to," I said. Donovan called me on a Thursday, 2 weeks after our kitchen table conversation. He said he and my daughter had been talking and wanted to know if I'd had any time to think about Sunridge. I have, I said, and I'd like to have you both to dinner this weekend, I said. Saturday, I'll cook. He paused. He was trying to read the tone. People who are used to being the smartest person in the room always try to read tones. It gives them something to do while underestimating you. Sure, he said. That'd be nice. On Saturday, I made short ribs the way my wife taught me, low and slow in the oven for 4 hours with red wine and shallots and fresh thyme from the pot on my kitchen windowsill. I made roasted potatoes and a green salad and bought a bottle of Cabernet from the wine shop on 5th Street, where the owner had known my wife and always asked how I was doing. I set the table with the good dishes. I lit the candles. My daughter hugged me at the door and said the house smelled incredible. My son-in-law shook my hand and said, "Something smells great." I said, "Sit down. I'll get the wine." We ate. We talked about their dog, who had an ear infection. We talked about the neighborhood association meeting that Donovan was apparently now running, which he mentioned twice without being asked. My daughter told me about a project at work she was excited about, designing a community gardens for a school district. And I listened carefully because she's always been good at that kind of work, at thinking about what makes a space feel like it belongs to people. After I cleared the plates and poured the last of the wine, I said, "I want to talk about the house." Donovan straightened. My daughter looked at her glass. "I've given it real thought," I said, "and I want to be honest with both of you, because I think you deserve honesty." Donovan nodded. Magnanimous. Prepared to receive my agreement gracefully. "I'm not selling," I said. His face shifted, just slightly. The careful neutrality of a man recalculating. "Dad," my daughter started. "Let me finish," I said, not unkindly. "This house is paid for. It has been paid for since 2001. There is no mortgage, no lien, no financial burden of any kind associated with it. The property taxes are current. The maintenance is current. I handle everything myself, which I am entirely capable of doing." I paused. "I understand you were concerned about my financial situation, and I appreciate the concern. I want to address it directly." I reached into the pocket of my shirt and laid an envelope on the table. "This is a letter from my financial advisor," I said. I asked him to prepare a summary. Not specific numbers. I don't think specific numbers are anyone's business but mine and the IRS's, but a general picture. I thought you should have it. Donovan picked it up. He opened it. I watched his eyes move across the page. I watched him go still. My daughter leaned over to look. She went still too, but for a different reason, I think. Her stillness was something quieter, more complicated. Donovan said, "This is accurate," I said. I had Bert review it as well. He set it down. He looked at me for the first time the way men look at each other when the assumptions have shifted. "You sold a company," he said, "in 2009. You never mentioned. You never asked," I said, gently. And I didn't think it was relevant. I don't live expensively. I drive an old truck. I do my own yard work. People see what they expect to see. He had nothing to say to that. My daughter was crying, quietly, not dramatically. Just the kind of crying that happens when you realize something about your father you hadn't let yourself see. "I didn't know," she said. "I know you didn't," I said. "That was my choice, not a deception. I've always believed that what I've built is mine to manage until the day I'm not capable of managing it. And I'm not there yet, not by a long shot." She nodded. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. We sat that way for a while. Donovan, to his credit, didn't say anything foolish. He looked at the table. He looked at the letter. He looked at me. Finally, he said, "I think I misread the situation." "You did," I said. "Most people do. I've never considered that their problem to solve." I got up and brought out the dessert, which was a pecan pie from the bakery on Elm, because some things are better left to professionals. I poured decaf. The candles had burned down to stubs by then, and the wax had pooled in the holders my wife picked out at a market in Vermont in 1998, and I had never once considered replacing. My daughter called me the next morning early. She said she hadn't slept well. "I'm sorry," she said, "for going along with it." "Don't apologize for your marriage," I said. "Just remember what you know now." She was quiet. "He's not a bad person," she said. It sounded like she was reminding herself. "No," I agreed. "He just assumed things he shouldn't have. A lot of people do that. The question is what they do when the assumptions turn out to be wrong." We talked for a while about nothing in particular. About the garden project. About whether I wanted to come for Thanksgiving or they should come to me. About the dog's ear. The ordinary architecture of a family that is still, despite everything, a family. Before she hung up, she said, "Dad, the shares. Are you—" "I'm fine," I said. "Everything is exactly where it needs to be." "Okay," she said. And then quietly, "I love you." "I know you do," I said. "I love you too." That's the whole point. There are things I've learned over 63 years that I try to keep simple enough to actually use. One of them is this: the people who underestimate you are not your enemies. They are simply people who haven't been given reason to look harder. Sometimes that's their failure. Sometimes it's yours, for not speaking plainly enough. Often it's just the way things go when people get busy with their own stories and forget to be curious about yours. Donovan is not a villain. He is a man who got comfortable. He looked at me and saw an older man in an old truck in a house he thought was an asset to be liquidated, and he started planning around that picture because it was the only picture he had. I don't hold that against him. I hold it as information. What I hold against no one, including myself, is keeping quiet for as long as I did. I should have said more, years ago. Not about the money. The money is private and will remain so. But about who I am, about the work that went into it, about what it means to build something slowly, quietly, over decades, without needing anyone to notice. My wife knew. She knew every version of it, from the early years when we were careful and worried, and counting every month, to the later years when things were different and we were careful still, because that was just who we were. She never wanted a bigger house. She planted a maple tree. She bought candle holders at a market in Vermont. She taught me to make short ribs. She has been gone for 7 years. The tree she planted is 30 years old now, and it is, without question, the best thing in the yard. The house is paid for. The accounts are in order. The trusts are funded. The paperwork is filed. I am 63 years old, and I am not going anywhere. That was decided a long time ago, before any of this happened, before any envelope was laid on any table. It was decided the first time I pulled into this driveway and understood that what I was building was not a financial position. It was a life, a whole, complete, deliberate life. Nobody takes that from you if you know what it is, and I always knew what it was.